Are you someone who's gotten a medical bill in the mail and you just can't make heads or tail of it, and you just want someone to explain some of it, like at least the basics, so you have an understanding of what the heck they're talking about? So today I'm going to explain the basics of the medical bill and then how you can find more information about why some of those procedures might not have been paid. Hey everyone, I'm Victoria. I'm a medical coder, auditor, educator, and content creator, and on my channel I provide tips, tricks, and tutorials on medical coding. But today I want to talk about medical bills and how you can get a basic understanding of your medical bill. So the best way to do this is to actually walk through a couple of medical bills. Now, I just want to say I have not obtained these from any current or past employers. I have blurred out all of the private information, but they were obtained with permission. So let's just get into it, and I can show you some of the things that you might want to look out for when you're just kind of reviewing your own medical bills. So the first thing you're going to see here on that top line is how much this total was. So this was the total charge that was sent to the insurance. So this provider billed $576 to the insurance, and they adjusted off a good amount of it, $289.32. So that insurance payment is basically saying, you know, the provider billed you this much, but we have a contract with you. We're only going to pay you a portion of that. So we have this contract and we've agreed that we're only going to pay a certain amount for types of services, and you're going to adjust off the rest. The patient responsibility total is $25, and then there's that balance due of $25. So the first thing you'll see here is this immunization. So the patient was due for their flu shot. It's flu season. This is something that commonly, if you go in for any kind of service from those dates where flus are rampant, they're going to ask you to get a flu shot. With the flu shot, there's actually two charges. So there's one for them actually administering it, so giving you the injection, and the second is for the solution, the actual drug that they're of the flu vaccine. So you may see that there's two charges there for one kind of service, but they're really two different components of the same service, the administering it and for the actual drug itself. Those codes that you see in the column there, those are the CPT codes. They're codes for different types of procedures. So instead of having to send a huge note or summary or record to the insurance company, that's all kind of textual things, they just narrow it down to a code that they can go, oh yeah, we pay for 90460, we don't pay for 90460, or attach the fee to it. It's a lot easier to do that with a code set versus a huge narrative of text. So you can see here that 90460 is for the administration of that first component of that vaccine. It was charged $31. They adjusted $6 and insurance paid $25. So the next one, they charged $33 for the flu vaccine itself. They adjusted off $10.82, and then the insurance paid $22.18. Next, the patient also had a pure tone hearing test. This was a pediatric patient. They were due for some preventative measures, and they had their hearing checked. That was $25. Next, under that, you'll see the ocular instrument screening. So ocular meaning your eye. So this patient had an eye exam, but if you see that $10, there was a $10 charge, nothing was adjusted, insurance didn't pay anything, and it says the patient responsibility is $10. So I'm actually going to show you then how you can determine why that $10 wasn't paid. So next we have an office visit, and then underneath that you'll see a preventative visit. So this is something that happens commonly with patients. You go in for your scheduled preventative visit where they kind of check you head to toe and tell you, you know, it's time for your colonoscopy, or you need to improve your diet, or here's some things you can do to lead a healthy life. And those are your preventative visits. But sometimes during those, there's a problem that gets addressed too, that you might go into your provider and say, you know, I've had a cough for the past 2 days. Well, they have to address that. That's not part of your preventative visit. So they actually charge you a separate fee for that. Or if maybe you go in and you have chronic conditions, you know, the fact that you have chronic conditions alone isn't going to mean there's an extra visit. But if there's something wrong with them that they need to significantly address, that they need to do things that's way above and beyond what's normally included in a preventative visit, that maybe they have to call your specialist or order extra testing or do extra work, they might bill for a separate visit for that. So in this case, that's what happened to this patient. So they had this 99214, and that's for an office or outpatient visit. So that's a visit that you might have at your primary care physician or internal physician, even maybe your OBGYN if you're having a problem, and they are on different levels. So a level 1 visit might be a patient that is just coming in for a weight check or a blood pressure check, and then they go up to a level 5. And a level 5 is a patient who maybe has a lot of chronic conditions, they're having issues with them, they're not being compliant, compliant and they have a higher level of severity, or the patient requires a lot of different care from that provider. So that provider might have to talk to specialists, spend a lot of time documenting. They might have to examine other areas or order different studies or review a whole lot of past historical notes. So depending on what kind of problems you're having, that you can fall anywhere between that level 1 through that level 5. So this patient was a level 4, meaning that they probably had something not super severe, but something that required a lot of time consumption by that provider to maybe order extra studies or coordinate some care or talk to the patient and counsel them. So in that case, they have a copay. So that's their office visit copay. So it was charged $241. Insurance adjusted a good amount of that, and they paid only $92. But the patient is responsible, or whoever is responsible for the bill, has to pay off $15 as that copayment for that office visit. Their preventative visits are often covered at 100% because insurances like you to go and get preventative care instead of problem-based care. So that was paid off at the entirety. The charge was $236. They contracted to pay $105 for those services for this insurance. So that's what they paid, and everything else was adjusted. So at the bottom of this, you can see the responsibility is $25, and that's for the $15 copay that's listed here, and this $10 ocular instrumentation thing that wasn't covered. So what you can do to find out more information about why something may not have been covered is you can go through your insurance and get the EOB, or explanation of benefits. The explanation of benefits is the summary that your insurance gives you of all the information of why things may or may not have been covered through them. Depending on your insurance, they might send you these in the mail, or you might just be able to log on to your insurance website with your account information, and they'll have them all listed for you, all the information about why things may or may not have been covered. So let's look at this one over here on this one for Highmark. This patient, I blocked out a lot of their information, but you can see here's all those different charges that they had, and the insurance is giving you information about the copays and what was responsible. And then where is this testing that they said that they did not cover? Oh, here it is. It says diagnostic eye procedure, $10. There was non-covered, and then it gives you this code here, and it says see remarks. And that see remarks says see remark U5006A. So if we scroll all the way down, it will tell us information here, and here is our remark. It says the patient's coverage does not provide for this service or diagnostic study as part of their preventative schedule. Therefore, no payment can be made for this service. So basically what it's saying is this patient, they cover for preventative services, but this isn't one of the ones that they cover for. They didn't deem that this patient, maybe at their age interval or whatever, that they deemed it was something that they medically needed. So they're just saying, hey, we're not going to cover for it. The patient didn't really need it. So sometimes this gets a little tricky with insurances, because if you call them and ask them, hey, maybe why wasn't this covered? Sometimes they'll tell you it wasn't coded correctly by your provider. And sometimes it's not just that it wasn't coded correctly, it's that maybe that patient didn't meet the criteria to code it that way that gets paid. There's a lot of things with screening versus diagnostic. So let's say your insurance covers a screening mammography. They want to screen you and make sure that you don't have breast cancer. That screening is different from a diagnostic mammography. So a diagnostic mammography would be, we found a lump in your breast and we have to diagnose what that is. So that's not a screening service, that's a diagnostic. And for some things they will pay for screenings, but maybe not diagnostics. Or they'll say, we can't screen you for something that we know that you have, that maybe we don't pay for certain types of laboratory services because we know you have diabetes. We're not going to screen you for diabetes because we know you already have it. And sometimes there's those struggles between the insurance company and the provider saying, yeah, we coded it correctly based off of what you have. And the insurance is saying, no, they didn't code it correctly. And if they coded it this way, it would have gotten paid. Well, if they'd have coded it that way, that might have been something that have gotten paid, but it would have been something that may not have been correct, and the provider would not have been compliant. So providers aren't really allowed to just change the codes just to get things paid. So imagine you're going to a store and you find a product that you really like, you take it up to the register. That cashier can't go, hey, I just like you, so you can just have that product for free. I'll just mark it down to 0, because that's not really their call to make. And there have been providers who have wound up in a lot of legal problems because they just coded things to get paid. Because it's not really fair to the insurance companies, and I'm sure some of you are probably very opinionated about insurance companies, but it's not really fair to the insurance company that they just pick and choose and go, hey, these patients, we're not going to charge them anything, but hey, you Aetna, we're going to charge you $500. So as much as your physician may love you very much, they could wind up in a lot of legal hot water and even lose their medical license if they start changing things just to get them paid when they're actually not compliant. So the next thing I want to show you is that after this visit, this patient had some studies that were ordered and had to have them completed. So we got bills then for those as well. So it looks like this patient had some ultrasounds done. There were 2 different ultrasounds, and they were done by the same tech on the same ultrasound wand, but they were done for 2 different areas, so there's 2 different charges. One of these was transvaginal, and one of them was retroperitoneal. So they were looking basically at 2 different areas. And there's 2 different charges for these. They're both $541. There was an adjustment done. And then the patient's balance was actually a little over $1,000 because this went to the patient's deductible. A deductible is the amount that a patient has to pay before insurance will start covering for services. There are high deductible plans where you may have $8,000, $13,000 that you have to pay out of pocket before your insurance does. And after that, it doesn't mean that insurance is going to cover necessarily everything at 100%. You might still have a coinsurance that you're still responsible for 10%, 20%, 40% of those bills after that deductible has been met. And that can even change depending on if you're in-network, meaning that you're using the providers and services that your insurance company really likes and they have special contracts with them, or if you're out of network, meaning you're not using the providers that your insurance company prefers that you use. So in this case, it all went to deductible and coinsurance, so the patient is responsible for $1,008.20. Now, the interesting thing is, if you'll notice here, it says that this was the technical service. It says service type there, technical. What does that mean? So with things like studies, ultrasounds, x-rays, etc., there's 2 services that you might have. There is the technical, and then there's the professional. So think about an x-ray. The x-ray tech is going to go in, use that x-ray machine and perform that x-ray. That is the technical component. That is the cost of them actually using that machine. And then there's the professional component, meaning someone has to look at that x-ray and interpret it and go, oh yeah, that was a fracture, and write up a report saying exactly what they found. So those are 2 different components that can be billed. Sometimes the provider does both of them. Sometimes they're the one that owns that equipment, so they bill you for that, and they read that x-ray and do the interpretation. And if they do both of those, you might only get 1 bill, but if those are 2 different providers or 2 different organizations providing those services, you will get 2 bills. So in this case, you can see these are the same services, but there's a lower charge, and that's because this was the interpretation of those ultrasounds. So the first bill was for the use of that ultrasound equipment and the tech and all of that, but this is for actually looking at those ultrasounds and figuring out the diagnosis. So in this case, these are slightly smaller charges. This one's only $77, this one's only $83 versus the $500 in some of the previous ones. And then there is it goes to that coinsurance again. So there is a small amount of a percentage of it that's due and responsible by the patient or guarantor to have to pay for that. So this patient had a $1,000 deductible, so they fulfilled that $1,000, but they're still responsible for a small percentage of coinsurance after that. So in this case, they got a bill for the interpretation of that, and it was just $8.02. So it's a lot to look out for, and it can get very, very confusing, especially if you've got a lot of different bills and it was for the same visit. Sometimes, like I said, you might go in for that one sort of ultrasound encounter, but they're looking at 2 different things. And then there's the use of the equipment and then also the interpretation of those results. So there's a lot going on there. So it can get very cumbersome to understand your medical bill. But don't forget, you have those EOBs, those explanation of benefits, where they'll break down for you why things may or may not have been paid and even give you a number probably to call at your insurance company to get more information about your medical bills and what is and is not covered. And there are specialists available that will help you with that information. And if you're struggling paying your medical bills, make sure you call those healthcare organizations and try to work with them about payment plans. A lot of them are very good with setting up financial aid for patients that are unable to afford their care. Now, I hope you found that overview helpful. Now, I don't personally do denials resolution or review of personal medical bills, but if you are someone who does, or you know someone who does, drop their information in the comments so that if anyone is looking for those sort of services, they have someone to contact. If you found this valuable, I would really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in more billing and coding content, I would highly encourage you to subscribe. And if you want alerts, you can hit that notification bell so you will get pushed alerts when I post new episodes. I hope I'll see you in the next episode, and until then, just keep on coding on.